My name is Gžegožs Gajda. I work at the European Investment Bank, and I'm a senior urban development specialist. Today, I would like to share some of our experience of using public-private partnerships in delivery of housing, specifically social and affordable housing. But before I be talking about PPPs, I would like to share some of the background, some of the best practices that we can observe in how some of Western and Northern European countries are able to deliver social and affordable housing in an efficient way. So it all starts with analysis of population's income. Here we have an example of one specific city, but we can see similar distribution of income in very many other cities in Europe, but also elsewhere. So when you look at the income distribution in a city, you can divide it into deciles. So basically, we take entire population of the city and divide them in groups of 10%, and each group has a certain income level from the lowest to the highest. Here in the table, we can see 5 first deciles, which is basically half of the population of the city divided in those income brackets. So as you can see, people with very low income cannot really afford any housing. So people from the first income group, first decile and second, they can afford to pay a rent of, say, 60 euros or 180 euros. And if they want to take out a loan, they can take out a loan for, say, 18 or 57,000 euros. And this is definitely not sufficient to buy a house. If we look at people with a bit higher incomes, so third and fourth decile, we see that still with this income level, they would struggle to be able to achieve any possibility to acquire housing. Even people within the fifth decile, which is basically a middle income in this city, they can afford something priced at a very low end of the spectrum. So they can afford rent of 400 euro, or if they want to take out a loan, they can borrow 124,000 euros, which is not very sufficient to buy something that would match their needs in the local market. So let's look at what really is offered in that city. Now, if we look at that city and its offer of houses to buy, you can see that people with this low income and people with this intermediate income, so bottom half of the population by income, they cannot really find anything on the market. The offer that they can afford is very low. And of course, people with high income, so people from deciles from 6 to 10, they can probably find something that they can afford in the market easily. So how countries react to this problem? They react by building social housing, or social and affordable housing, as we would like to call it, to capture all potential definitions that exist within European Union. So as you can see, Western European countries and Northern European countries lead in a share of social and affordable housing in Europe. And that is how they address the issue of lack of affordability for this bottom half of the income spectrum. This housing is built everywhere in the city. On this map, we can see the center of the city of Amsterdam, and each colorful building is a building in which some social and affordable housing exists. So imagine that you walk through the city of Amsterdam and you look around and you see windows of residential buildings, and you count those windows, and basically 2 out of 5 windows you count when you walk through the city, that would be social and affordable housing. This housing is spread throughout the city, through its suburbs, through the city center. And the idea here is that you don't segregate the people. People live together people with higher income and people with lower income, their children go to the same school, the neighbors meet each other in local park, and that's how, by living together, a significant cost of social segregation or social exclusion is avoided. Social exclusion is a big problem in many European cities. Sometimes we hear that there are districts which are dangerous and nobody wants to enter those districts. Now, these districts have not always been like that, but by placing people with very similar socioeconomic backgrounds, whenever such group is encountering economic problems, then those problems impact the entire neighborhood. So the good lesson from European best practice is not to create those locations with people with the same socioeconomic background. It's better to have people with various socioeconomic background living close to each other, because that's how they can support each other, and that's how problems will not get concentrated in one particular region. So Amsterdam is a very good example of doing that. Now, how this housing looks like. These are actual pictures of public housing projects that we have done when we were looking at projects proposed for financing. So that's how this housing looks. It doesn't look from the outside look as something that is catering to the needs of unprivileged citizens. This housing looks good. This housing looks well maintained. This housing looks like a good quality housing, and that's how it should be. This creates a level of dignity. This creates a healthy neighborhood with well-maintained buildings and well-maintained neighborhoods. People feel safe, and people feel welcomed in that neighborhood. And this is possible when there is sufficient funds for maintenance. And if these funds for maintenance are not provided, then neighborhoods would fall into disrepair and very soon will become unwelcoming, and people, those who can afford this, would migrate out of it. And there have been a lot of cases, fortunately, not so much in Europe, where public housing projects were poorly maintained and people had to move out of them, leaving only those who prefer to live in neighborhoods like that, leading to crime and other social problems. So periodical maintenance and ability to reconstruct buildings when needed are critical to success of public housing projects. So how this is done? If we look at the best practice, and what is the best practice, actually, someone may ask. And for this, I have included this little map here. And I like to use this map when I'm talking about housing, but the title of this map can be a little bit misleading. So here we are talking about estimated average age of people leaving their parental home. So the linkage here with housing is such that when housing is affordable and young people can afford to live in their own house, they would move their parent household early. And as you can see from this map, countries of Northern Europe and Western Europe are those countries which seem to be successful in offering young people opportunities to live on their own. Whereas countries of Eastern Europe and countries of Southern Europe seem to not be able to offer young people an opportunity to live on their own. And that is why young people live with their parents for quite some time. So to me, when I'm thinking about best practices, I'm looking at those countries from northern and western part of European Union. And when we look at the way their housing systems are organized, we can see the following main parameters. Predominantly, housing offered as social and affordable housing is rental housing. So people can rent this housing. They don't have to take out a mortgage loan. for many years. They can be flexible in renting something that is priced affordably. In order to be able to rent this house, they have to be eligible, and this eligibility is very often based on income. So you have to have income below certain level to be eligible for this type of housing. But there are countries which have a different approach and offer this housing to everybody, to every citizen of their country. Now, how this housing is allocated? When you are eligible, the question is, who will be the first to get that housing unit? And the most typical way of doing this is based on waiting lists. Sometimes these waiting lists are modified by adding some additional criteria of prioritization. So single parents household, people with disabilities, or maybe people with multiple children would actually gain a priority over some other people. And then the rent. I mentioned the rent has to be affordable. So the rent typically is substantially below what the market would offer, or it is just outright based on household income. There are countries that basically require you to pay a percentage of your household income in a form of rent, and that is how they achieve affordability. Very often, there is a system in which whatever profit is created in delivery of this housing cannot be distributed to shareholders of housing providers. There is a requirement that this profit is reinvested in new housing or in renovation of existing housing. And this is also an element that focuses the attention on this sector only of socially oriented providers. Very often these are public entities, but when they are privately owned, they have a social objective. Very often these are cooperatives or charities, and these institutions with a social income, with a social objective, can prioritize investment in this type of housing where profit cannot be distributed. As I have shown you before, these neighborhoods have to look good and they have to be well connected to infrastructure. So the development of those projects have to be planning-led. And social inclusion is an important element of their design. So we want to have people with diverse backgrounds, with diverse ethnicity, economic activity, age, and that's how these neighborhoods thrive. Very often, somehow, tenants are involved in decision-making, and a very good example is approach to rents. Very often, rents are decided by a process in which representatives of landlords and representatives of tenants meet on a mid-term basis and review changes in the macroeconomic situation, and then this leads to an agreement on how quickly the rents should be growing. To continue with the best practice, one thing that I mentioned before is that we need to see a system in which there is funding for maintenance of those buildings. And if the rents are low, the question can be, how can we actually finance the maintenance of those buildings with low rents? And the answer here are the first 3 bullets. First of all, we would like to offer this housing to quite a wide and diverse group of people. I was mentioning before that people who face affordability concerns are very often the lower half of the population in a given city. That is why the best practice is in Europe that social and affordable housing segment provides housing to people who represent from 40 to 70% of the society. And there are also some countries in which the entire society is eligible. But generally, there is a quite wide eligibility definition. And with wide eligibility and smart allocation, we can have some poorer people paying lower rents and some richer people paying higher rents to get an average rent which is sufficient to pay for our maintenance. And that's one of the best practices. Second one is a long-term financing mechanism. which is designed in such a way that it offers long-term financing for public housing, but it is structured as a non-budgetary, so off-budget. It doesn't count as public debt under Eurostat criteria. And with this system, there is an ability to transform private savings of businesses and individuals into long-term non-profit assets that are then serving this goal of low rents, affordable rents, and also ensuring that the whole system is financially sustainable. Those entities here, whose logos I included on this slide, are some of those companies that are basically delivering this best practice. So everything I'm talking about, these companies actually implement in practice. So it is also very important what is the legal environment in which they work. So there has to be a good legislation, it has to be clear, and it has to be such that these companies can have stable legal environment to work in. Very often it means that only some general principles of this are regulated centrally. So there's a national regulation, but everything is delivered locally by local government units or by local socially oriented enterprises. In any real estate activity, land is key. And here, for the success of these types of projects, there has to be a democratic approach to land management. Only with inclusion of social criteria in land allocation, land will be allocated for these type of projects, because as I mentioned before, they are not for profit. If there is any profit made, this profit has to be reinvested. So, just to finish on this topic, since we are offering housing which is attractive but priced, with a low rent, there has to be transparency and public control of the whole process, so that this housing is serving equally everybody and not maybe people who are well connected. So, on the background of this large sector of social and affordable housing, what is the role of PPPs? Where do PPPs sit in the whole picture? So as we see from our experience, and EIB has financed a couple of social housing PPPs in European Union, we can say that the role of those PPPs is following. They provide an additional way that complement the already established system, so they can deliver more housing without improving the existing system. So it gives you an opportunity to have a mechanism to deliver some additional housing quickly, or to deliver some additional housing in places where it was not delivered before, or it can be delivered in a more innovative way, which is additional to what your system does already. With good PPPs, when they are well structured, they can be treated as off-budget, which is very important for countries which are approaching borrowing limits by Eurostat. In case of housing crises, where the response have to be given quickly, but only for a limited time, this additional implementation capacity can be actually quite important. And well-structured PPPs can actually build these houses quickly, and then these houses can very rapidly be added to existing housing portfolio. It's also a way to leverage private capital. Typically, PPPs are funded by private equity providers and private banks, providing a mix of equity and debt capital that is not putting pressure on public finances. And most important from our point of view is that with private sector, who have very strong organizational skills and it's able to innovate, you can actually build houses in new way. Modular construction could be used, prefabrication can be used, advanced building management systems can be included in the project design. And there is a strong motivation to do it, because with a PPP, the private sector's attention is to bring costs down in the long term, not just for the construction period, but also assuming, say, 25 years of maintenance. So by putting these two together, there is a space for innovation in construction and maintenance. However, I have to say one thing, that what we have seen from the experience that we had already in Europe, this could be a good part of a solution for affordable housing problems in a given country, but it cannot be just the only solution. PPPs have to work as additional mechanism to deliver housing, but there has to be a system that is already in place to which the PPPs serve as an input. So PPPs are able to deliver those units that the countries need, but there has to be a system that can absorb those units. There has to be a system that will maintain those units when they are handed over by the private partner to the public sector. There has to be a system that will manage the tenants, that will ensure that tenants are treated fairly, that all those objectives of social inclusions are met, and also that there is a system that ensures that whatever is built and then is maintained is actually functioning in a way that would then provide financing for future expansion of housing and finance necessary capital expenditures in modernization, renovations, and so on. Because cities do not stand still, they are living organisms, and there has to be a structure which will be responding to future challenges and future needs. Thank you very much, and it was a pleasure speaking to you today. Thank you.